It's my honor to speak at the 35th anniversary of the Farmer to Farmer program, a volunteer program that's always held a very special place in my heart. Volunteerism was always a big part of my family. As a child, my mom held League of Women Voters meetings in our living room, led statewide efforts to integrate public schools, and served on the Arlington, Virginia commissions, which I later served on following in her footsteps. I began working at USAID in 1977, and my motto was not just think, but act globally and locally. I applied many of the lessons I learned as a community volunteer in the design of some 100 USAID projects. In many cases, I preferred working with our volunteers, who offered their assistance from their heart and personal experience. While in USAID's legislative office, I got to know Congressman Doug Beeryder, who was the only member of the Foreign Affairs Committee from a predominantly farming district. He sponsored BIFAD legislation, which is a partnership with land-grant universities to share agricultural expertise to help end world hunger. He frequently told the story about his congressional trip to Central America, where he was inspired to send volunteers to help farmers overseas. After that congressional trip, we began to talk about using an obscure and vague provision in the earlier Farm Bill entitled the Farmer to Farmer program. Congressman Beeryder wanted to earmark 0.1% of Public Law 480 Food for Peace program for the Farmer to Farmer program. The National Farmers Union and other co-op farm organizations helped advocate for the program as well. In 1985, a $400,000 Farmer to Farmer pilot project was funded. As I worked with the USAID Administrator Peter McPherson at the time, I chaired the implementation of this pilot. We decided to award the program to a sleepy, little-known organization, Volunteers and Overseas Cooperative Assistance, VOCA, that earlier fielded only about 25 farmer volunteers a year. For a few years, VOCA ran the program exclusively before it was competed globally with other implementing partners. During the early years, Farmer to Farmer became more well-known as volunteers visited their congressmen, including Congressman Beeryder, on returning from assignments. Beeryder's focus was on poverty and world hunger. So when Eastern and Central Europe opened up, he was hesitant to move the program away from poor farmers. But he later agreed to additional 0.1% for transitional countries in Eastern and Central Europe, and later the former Soviet Union. To get things started, I earmarked funds for farmer volunteers to go to Poland. The program was greatly expanded when President George H. Bush wanted to help Russian farmers in supporting democratic reforms. Many USAID missions have also added a great deal of additional funding to expand the Farmer to Farmer program over the years. At the start of the expansion of the program in Russia, I took Congressman Beeryder's legislative director, Nell Temple, to observe the first assignments. It was quite an adventure. I wrote the trip up for the Christian Science Monitor in an article entitled Grassroots Leaders in Russia Embrace Change. The article discussed our visits to farmer assignments, striving to reform the collective farm systems from farm credit and emerging private farming. I remember driving past two small towns named Lenin and Marks along the Volga River to reach a project site. A former communist leader was hired to manage a privately privatized cocoa farm. On advice from a successful Minnesota farm couple, they organized the farm into 13 small agribusinesses and 12 individual holdings. Our subsequent evaluations found that U.S. volunteers had meaningful and lasting impacts at the grassroots level. When the 1989 Farm Bill was up for renewal, Senator Weihe's staff wanted to rewrite the Farmer to Farmer provision to reflect how it actually operated. There were many obsolete provisions in the legislation. With Doug Beeryder's concurrence, I drafted the new legislation and changed its mandate to focus on agribusiness operations and farmer associations, not just individual farmers. This considerably broadened the reach of the program. The new Title V specified what types of organizations were eligible to access the program and listed key agribusiness and agricultural systems. Subsequently, the title was renamed for John Ornonsky, a pilot killed in the 9/11 attack, who had assisted overseas farmers on his Massachusetts farm, and Congressman Doug Beereichert's chief sponsor. An additional provision for special emphasis on sub-Saharan Africa and the Caribbean was added in 2002 in the legislation. Around this time, some historical black colleges and universities also got connected to the program, receiving small grants or participating in different ways. And the farmer-to-farmer implementing partners have had considerable success over the years in expanding minority volunteer participation. The program has evolved over the years with more implementers and new organizations participating and focusing on a broader range of projects. Many volunteer assignments support USAID's missions in agricultural sectors and priorities and work in other areas given that the program is quite flexible. Over the years, I've evaluated many farmer-to-farmer projects. Here are some favorites. One of my favorites is about honey marketing in the Far East Russia. I was asked to help Tri-Valley growers with their farmer-to-farmer program projects in Russia and Georgia. For their final report, they asked me to interview both recipients and volunteers who carried out the assignments. Tri-Valley headquarters was located in Modesto, California. Many Russian immigrants settled there in the late 1920s. Volunteer Alan Buckley grew up with the children of these volunteers as his classmates. He was a retired stockbroker, took up bee pollination of almond trees as a result of his daughter's involvement with beekeeping in 4-H. He remembered that the best honey was said to come from Spas, a 4.5-hour ride up the Trans-Siberian Railway from Vladivostok to a microclimate region next to the Chinese border. Tri-Valley sent Alan Buckley on several assignments to work with this Beekeepers Association. What made it special was the fact that it was located in a lime tree forest, and its nectar gave a honey a distinctive, fascinating lime taste. He told me as he was putting on his beekeeping paraphernalia, his host just began laughing. They had stripped to their shorts. Their variety of honeybees are very gentle. Alan listened for 2 weeks, did not offer advice. Once he had their trust, he suggested they market their honey along the Trans-Siberian Railway all the way to Moscow. When he went home, he purchased and sent them $15,000 worth of 12-ounce plastic beer jars, tanks, strainers, and other equipment, a donation to improve their product quality. Russians value quality honey, and the association more than doubled their profits. Another great story is a bread plant that was going bankrupt in Voronezh in the Black Earth region of southern Russia. The women workers had kicked out the ineffective manager and in desperation turned to Tri-Valley for volunteer technical help. Joe Tuck, a ponytailed former hippie from one of the most successful worker cooperatives in San Francisco, the Alvarado Street Bakery, was recruited for 2 assignments. He helped them diversify their recipes and encouraged them to shift to more profitable pastries with similar ingredients. These 2 recommendations alone increased profits by 50%. Next, he suggests they buy back day-old bread at 100% of its selling price from the grocery stores. The bakery sold this bread in carts and created new products by toasting it into breadcrumbs and croutons. The bakery's volume increased from 2 to 8 tons in 20 months. He reorganized the bakery staff, similar to his Alvarado Street Bakery, to increase product quality. On the second assignment, he brought with him cutting molds for making cookies. He was delighted the bakery was operating successfully as a team, similar to his co-op back home. Not all projects were successful, of course, but so many had measurable impacts. And when I wrote about Farmer to Farmer, I always told a story, not just reciting places and numbers. When interviewing recipients, I explored all the effects, both monetary and practical. In nearly every evaluation, I found impacts that did not make it into typical reports. Remarkably, changes were often in the farmer's mindset, what they learned one-on-one and formally across kitchen tables, or recommendations that really just confirmed the direction they were thinking of taking. Those were often not the focus of the assignments. It can only be uncovered through a series of open-ended inquiries. More often than not, I found the volunteers' greatest impacts came from sharing their lifelong agricultural lessons. Some of the biggest impacts I observed were in the former Soviet bloc countries, where agribusiness had to restructure from state to private control. Agribusiness wanted to adopt Western marketing, packaging, and management techniques. They were eager learners, hungry for knowledge to compete even in European markets. Farmers must be open to grow and evolve, and volunteers can help them develop their powers. Real development comes from the development of minds and rethinking old ways. U.S. volunteers are passionate about sharing technologies and giving advice and thinking outside the box. In turn, they come back with a deeper understanding of foreign cultures and a mutual appreciation of shared life challenges. I want to conclude with what I consider the power of volunteers. In the U.S., public education, public libraries, civil rights, women's rights were all advanced by citizen activists. Over each decade from the 1920s and 1950s, volunteer farmer groups created agricultural cooperatives, rural credit unions, rural electric cooperatives, and rural telephone cooperatives. Today, through Farmer to Farmer, American agricultural volunteers are helping around the world in many new and exciting ways. Farmer to Farmer volunteers are not just advisors, but they bring with them the very best of American values. When I got involved with this fledgling program, no one would have guessed it would have grown and prosper over 35 years, sending tens of thousands of American farmers overseas to build a better world. I am so proud to have been present at the beginning, and I'm happy to be here with you today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.